I'm Bryn.
And I'm James.
And this is your go-to sports history.
So we're gonna go over a timeline of all sports dating back to the early 20th century. In 1936, Jesse Owens won 4 gold medals at the Nazi Olympics.
And just 2 years later, there was a horse race between Seabiscuit and War Admiral. Seabiscuit won, however War Admiral was the favorite because he won 3 triple crowns.
30 years later at the 1968 Olympics, Tommy Smith and John Carlos both used their podium spots to hold up their fists for Black Power.
In 1974, Rumble in the Jungle, Muhammad Ali beats George Foreman, not the Grail,
In 1980, the USA's Olympic hockey team took down the Soviet Union in the Miracle on Ice. 4 years later, sprinter Carl Lewis set the world record for the 100-meter dash. And in 1996, Michael Johnson set the world record for the 200-meter dash.
You may be wondering why I'm standing next to this disc golf. Well, in 1997, Tiger Woods became the youngest to ever win the Masters in regular golf.
1999 was a very eventful year for USA sports. Serena Williams won her first Grand Slam at the age of 17. That would be like us winning a Grand Slam. Lance Armstrong also won his first Tour de France. Wayne Gretzky retired with the most goals, assists, etc. ever. And the FIFA Women's World Cup team won it all, taking down Communist China in an overtime shootout.
Speaking of Lance Armstrong, in 2005, he had won his 7th Tour de France. In 2008, swimmer Michael Phelps won 8 gold medals, making it the most medals won in one Olympic game.
Most gold. In 2010, Shaun White won multiple medals at the Winter Olympics, landing the first ever double McTwist 1260.
In 2012, the women's gymnastics team, known as the Fierce Five, won the gold medal at the Olympics. I'm part of the Fierce Five.
The end of the 2010s saw the end of many great careers, with Michael Phelps swimming in his 5th and final Olympics in 2016, having him the most decorated Olympic athlete ever. In 2017, Serena Williams won another Grand Slam 18 years after her first. And in 2019, Tiger Woods won his 5th Masters 22 years after his first.
Now we're going to talk about America's pastime, baseball. See.
In 1839, Abner Doubleday invented the game of baseball in Cooperstown, New York. 30 years later, the first season of the MLB would be played, with the Cincinnati Red Stockings being the first team ever created.
In 1903, the first World Series happened and the Boston Americans won.
1901 to 1919 was known as the dead ball era, as it was dominated by pitching because the ball was harder to hit farther. The best players of this era were Walter Johnson and Cy Young, who were pitchers, and Honus Wagner and Ty Cobb as hitters.
In 1920s and 1930s, baseball rose greatly, as it was a favorite time because of Babe Ruth. Who knows why his name was Babe? I think his girlfriend maybe liked him, also known as the Great Bambino. And also in this era, this was when they didn't wear helmets yet. Sadly, Ray Chapman, you know his name, he got struck in the head with a baseball and sadly died.
World War II broke out, and it took many MLB players away from the game as they decided to serve in the Army. Stars like Ted Williams and Joe DiMaggio lost many years during their prime to help serve. And during this time, women's baseball broke out because all the men were at war.
In 1947, Jackie Robinson became the first black man to play in the MLB. For a long time, there was a Negro-only league. However, he broke that barrier playing for the Brooklyn Dodgers.
The 1990s to 2000s was known as the steroid era, as pitchers and hitters were using performance-enhancing drugs, making both those categories at an all-time high. Some of the best pitchers were Roger Clemens, Randy Johnson, and Pedro Martinez, and some of the best hitters included Barry Bonds, Sammy Sosa, Mark McGwire, and many more. It was the most entertaining time of baseball ever.
The summer of '98 was known as the home run race between Sammy Sosa and Mike McGwire. They both hit 60-plus home runs.
In 2004 and 2016, 2 of the biggest World Series droughts ever ended. In 2004, the Boston Red Sox won, ending their 86-year drought, and in 2016, the Chicago Cubs won, ending their 108-year drought. Some notable records for the MLB. The most World Series wins belongs to the Yankees. The most all-time career hits belongs to Pete Rose. Barry Bonds has the most career home runs. Cy Young has the most wins, and Nolan Ryan has the most strikeouts.
These are two of some of the most famous MLB scandals. In 1919, the Black Sox purposely lost because they bet against themselves. In 2017, the Astros were caught cheating in the World Series that they had just won because something was telling them which pitch was coming.
Now we're going to be talking about basketball and the NBA. In 1891, James Naismith wanted to create a sport that was less injury-prone than football, so basketball was born in Springfield, Massachusetts.
Initially, basketball was played inside with soccer balls, peach baskets, and 9-2-a-side. And just 4 years later, in 1895, the first collegiate game was played.
In 1909, the NCAA was founded, and 30 years later, 1939, the first year of March Madness happened.
In June of 1946, the NBA was formed, and just 3 years later, in 1949, the first season was played.
By the 1960s, the NBA was getting very popular. In the 1962 season, Wilt Chamberlain averaged 50 points per game, which is still a record, and he also scored 100 points in a single game that season, which is also a record.
In 1964, Bill Russell and the president of the NBA boycotted that they will not play the All-Star game unless there was a change in pension scheduling.
In 1965, Oscar Robertson became the first black president of the NBA Players Association. The 1970s was known as the lost era of basketball, as cocaine had taken over, as well as many scandals and black prejudice. And years later, 1976, the Oscar Robertson rule was put into play, allowing players to be paid more each offseason.
In 1980, Magic Johnson and Larry Bird took the league by storm and changed the game forever.
In 1984, the greatest basketball player of all time was drafted, Michael Jordan.
In the 80s, the Lakers won 5 rings, the Celtics won 3, and the Pistons won 2.
In the 1990s, Michael Jordan really took the league by storm, winning 6 rings, while the Rockets won 2 rings. In 1992, the first year that non-amateur players were allowed to play in the Olympics, the greatest basketball team ever assembled went over to Berlin and won gold.
They were the dream team. In 1996, Kobe Bryant was drafted, dominating the 2000s with Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal, and the Lakers winning 5 rings. In 1996, the WNBA was formed.
The 2003 draft class is known to be the best ever, with LeBron James, Carmelo Anthony, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh all being drafted.
In 2010, the Warriors won 3 rings and the Heat won 2. Go Warriors!
These are some NBA records. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar has the most career points scored, John Stockton has the most career assists and steals, and Wilt Chamberlain has the most career rebounds. The Boston Celtics and Lakers are tied for the most championships won.
Now we're going to take it down to the gridiron and talk about football.
And the NFL.
And the NFL.
1920, the NFA was formed. 2 years later, it was the NFL, and 4 years after that, it had 22 teams.
In 1931, the number of NFL teams declined to 10 teams due to the Great Depression.
In 1932 was the first playoff game. In 1939 was the first televised NFL game. Many years after that, in 1967, was the first Super Bowl.
In 1972, the Dolphins didn't lose a single game, and they had a perfect season.
In the 1980s, the 49ers and Joe Montana won 4 Super Bowls, and in the 1990s, the Cowboys won 3 Super Bowls.
In 2000, Tom Brady was drafted, and in 2002, he won his first Super Bowl. 2007, the Patriots, they won. Yep. What'd they do?
Every regular season game.
They won every regular season game.
And playoff game. But lost in the Super Bowl. In the 2010s, Aaron Rodgers won 4 MVPs, but Peyton Manning still holds the record, winning 5. And in 2021, Tom Brady won his 7th and most recent Super Bowl, a all-time record.
Now here are some of the most notable NFL records.
The most passing yards and touchdowns belongs to Tom Brady. The most receiving yards and touchdowns belongs to Jerry Rice. And the most rushing yards and touchdowns belongs to Emmitt Smith. Ray Lewis has the most career tackles, and Paul Krause has the most career interceptions, while Bruce Smith has the most career sacks.
Don't get it confused with my math teacher, Bruce Stallings. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel.